Landsknechte. The Landsknechte, also rendered as Landsknechts, were German mercenaries used in pike and shot formations during the early modern period. Consisting predominantly of pikemen and supporting foot soldiers, their front line was formed by Doppelsoldner, renowned for their use of Zweihänder and arquebus. They formed the bulk of the Holy Roman Empire's imperial army from the late 15th century to the early 17th century, fighting in the Habsburg-Valois Wars, the Habsburg-Ottoman Wars, and the European Wars of Religion. Although prone to mutiny if unpaid and divided within their ranks between Catholics and Lutherans, the Landsknechte were well-armed and experienced warriors, recruitable in large numbers throughout Germany and Austria by the Holy Roman Emperor. This guaranteed both quantity and quality to the imperial military for a century and a half, at their peak during the reign of Charles V of Habsburg, and under the leadership of notable captains such as Georg von Frundsberg and Nicholas of Salm. The imperial Landsknechts obtained important successes, such as the capture of the French king Francis I at the Battle of Pavia in 1525, and the resistance against the Ottoman Turks led by Suleiman the Magnificent at the Siege of Vienna in 1529, while also being responsible for the sack of Rome in 1527. Ninja. A ninja was a spy and infiltrator in pre-modern Japan. The functions of a ninja included siege and infiltration, ambush, reconnaissance, espionage, deception, and later bodyguarding. Antecedents may have existed as early as the 12th century. There is little evidence that they were assassins. They worked individually or in groups, often employed by daimyo. Ninjas were trained from a young age in the art of ninjutsu, and later from the 15th century in special camps or entire village schools. The most famous schools of ninjutsu were in Iga and Koga, mountainous areas difficult to reach. Contrary to modern stereotypes, ninja did not wear only black. Their costumes varied according to the mission. They could also wear the garb of a priest or musician to infiltrate. The main weapons were tekokagi, ashiko, kaginawa, shikomizue, makibishi, chigiriki, kusarigama, kusarifundo, and shuriken. Many leaders protected themselves from any potential assassins by equipping their castle with anti-ninja devices, such as loud creaking floors, confusing fittings, rotating walls, and hidden trapdoors. Nubian Archer. Nubian warriors excelled as archers, and their weapon became a symbol for Nubia. Hunting provided subsistence for Nubians throughout much of their history. Some of Nubia's most important trade products, like animal skins and ivory, came from the hunt. Archers formed the core of Nubian armies that vied with Egypt for control over parts of the Nile Valley, conquered Egypt in the 8th century BC, and confronted the troops of the Assyrian Empire. The skill of Nubian archers made them valued members in the military forces of other lands. Egyptian texts note Nubians in Egyptian armies. Nubian archers also served as warriors in the imperial army of Persia in the 1st millennium BC. Genoese Crossbowmen. The Genoese Crossbowmen were a famous military corps of the Middle Ages, who acted both in defense of the Republic of Genoa and as a mercenary force for other Italian and European powers. Armed with crossbows, they fought both on land and in naval battles. Notable examples are the battles of Meloria and Curzola. The members of the Genoese Crossbowmen were trained and organized in Genoa, but also came from other parts of Liguria. The main weapon of the Genoese archers was the crossbow, manufactured in Genoa by the Ballistri Corporation. The mercenaries were also equipped with a dagger, a light metal helmet, a gorget, and a large shield, called a pavis, which was used to reload the crossbow. The usual team consisted of an archer and 2 assistants, one supporting the pavis, the other responsible for drawing a second bow, thus doubling the rate of fire. One of the most famous and tragic appearances of the Genoese crossbowmen was at Crécy, in the service of France. Commanded by Carlo Grimaldi and Antonio Doria, some 5,000 Genoese crossbowmen were sent to the front line against the English archers. Unfortunately, the hasty nature of the precipitous nature meant that the wagons containing the pavilions and additional ammunition were left behind, and after a sudden storm broke out, the crossbowmen were useless. Ottone Doria ordered his troops to retreat, and the French knights commanded by Charles II considered this cowardice and slaughtered them as they retreated. Most of the archers were killed, including their commander. Losing only a very small number of soldiers, the English won the battle easily. Ashigaru. These soldiers were usually farmers who, in times of war, were conscripted to fight for their landowners. Unlike higher-ranking samurai, who wore full suits of samurai armor, even their horses were armored, Ashigaru usually wore armor with limited protection, such as domaru, harate, often without kabuto, just jingasa, a simple conical hat. A typical image of Ashigaru shows them wearing jingasa and harate, wielding either a spear, yari, or a matchlock weapon, Tanegashima. These weapons were favored because they required less training compared to the samurai's swordplay and archery skills. The armor was expensive, and since most Ashigaru were farmers and often faced financial hardship, they could not afford their own armor. Like their katana, Ashigaru's armor was usually borrowed from their daimyo. This type of borrowed armor was called okashigusoku. They were considered cheap and expendable resources in wartime. For example, when a retreat became unavoidable, Ashigaru units were often assigned the role of tono, which meant remaining on the battlefield to cover the lord or general's escape. Acting as decoys, these soldiers were virtually sacrificing their lives. The mortality rate for tono units was over 80%, making it a death sentence. However, with a growing need for a standing army in the 15th to 16th centuries, Ashigaru became professional soldiers, some being hired on a long-term basis and even elevated to samurai status for feats of valor. The reforms of military leaders like Oda Nobunaga made the Ashigaru an essential part of the army. Cossacks. Cossacks were brave warriors who, under the leadership of great commanders, defended the independence of the Ukrainian state for centuries. They were called free people and knights of the Ukrainian steppes for their bravery, desire for freedom, and immortal courage. Cossacks were nomads who led a military lifestyle and earned their livelihood through war and crafts, hunting, fishing, later trade, and agriculture. These people took part in military campaigns and were part of the state troops or outside guards of wealthy people, lived a very disciplined life, strictly following the daily routine, which included morning prayer and combat training. They also highly valued literature and education, and created their folklore. To live and conduct military affairs, the Cossacks built the so-called Sich, the center of Cossack life. The most famous is Zaporizhzhia Sich on the island of Khortytsia in the Dnipro River, but at least 8 more are mentioned in history. The noble and impressive history of the Cossack army ended tragically. In 1775, the Russian Empress Catherine II, the Great, ordered the destruction of Zaporizhzhia Sich and the liquidation of the Cossack people. The Russian Empire saw danger in the freedom-loving Cossacks, who could start revolutions and undermine the empire. By her order, the soldiers were deported to the Caucasus to carry out Russian orders. The Cossacks who managed to escape moved to the mouth of the Danube River and later to the Kuban. Ayyubid. Ayyubid soldiers were the military forces of the Ayyubid dynasty, founded by the famous Kurdish general Saladin in the 12th century. The Ayyubid army was ethnically and socially diverse, made up of Kurds, Turkomans, Arabs, mercenaries, as well as Mamluks, rigorously trained slave soldiers who would later play a key role in the rule of Egypt. Ayyubid forces included heavy cavalry as well as mounted archers, light infantry, and siege artillery. Equipped with chainmail armor, conical helmets, and round shields, the soldiers were armed with swords, spears, compound bows, and clubs. Saladin used this army to great effect against the Crusaders, achieving historic victories such as the Battle of Hattin, 1187, which saw him recapture Jerusalem. After his death, the empire was divided among the Ayyubid family, but the military forces remained professional until the decline of the dynasty. Gallowglass. The Gallowglass were elite warriors from the Gaelic clans of Scotland, who became famous between the 13th and 16th centuries. Hailing mostly from the western coast of Scotland, including Argyll and the Western Isles, many Gallowglasses settled in Ireland after losing their land during the Scottish Wars of Independence. In Ireland, they were taken in by local chieftains who gave them land in exchange for military service. Over time, the Gallowglasses became a key part of the Irish military, known for their heavy armor and fierce fighting skills. They were trained soldiers, often armed with two-handed axes, broadswords, and spears, and were crucial in many battles, defending strongholds or leading charge against enemies. The first records of the Gallowglass fighting in Ireland go back to 1259, and they played a major role in many Irish victories, including defeating the Normans in the 13th and 14th centuries. Spartan. Spartan warriors were among the most disciplined soldiers in the history of the ancient world. Sparta, a city-state in the Peloponnese, developed a social and military system entirely focused on war. All male citizens were trained from childhood to become soldiers through a harsh system called the agoj. From the age of 7, boys were separated from their families and subjected to a brutal regime of discipline, physical training, survival, hand-to-hand combat, and loyalty to the state. At 20 years old, men became active soldiers, but only at 30 were they considered full citizens. Their lives were controlled by the militarist Spartan state until the age of 60. The standard equipment of a Spartan warrior included a bronze helmet with visor, breastplate, and greaves, aspis, doru, and xiphos. Spartans fought in the phalanx formation, a compact wall of shields, spears, and armor. This tactic made the Spartans an almost impenetrable force in frontal combat. Their most famous confrontation was the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC, where King Leonidas and 300 Spartans held off around 200,000 to 300,000 soldiers of the Persian army led by Xerxes. Although they were ultimately defeated, their heroic resistance became a symbol of the ultimate sacrifice for the homeland. Despite their fame, Sparta Sparta was not invincible. After their victory in the Peloponnesian War against Athens, Spartan military power began to decline. In 371 BC, Sparta suffered a decisive defeat at the Battle of Leuctra against the city of Thebes. Rajput. The Rajput soldiers represented a noble warrior class of medieval India, active mainly between the 8th and 18th centuries. The word Rajput derives from the Sanskrit Rajaputra, meaning son of a king. The Rajput soldiers followed an extremely strict chivalric code. Courage and loyalty to their leader were top priorities. In the face of certain defeat, they practiced saka, a heroic last stand in battle, while the women of the clan resorted to jauhar, collective self-immolation, to avoid captivity or dishonor. A famous example is the fall of Chittorgarh Fortress to Alauddin Khalji in 1303, when thousands of Rajput women committed jauhar, while the men went out to die on the battlefield. The Rajputs were masters of cavalry, often using horses of the Marwari breed, trained for endurance and agility. Their preferred weapons were the Sirohi sword, with a curved blade, excellent for quick slashes, the spear, the round shield, and the bow. They offered remarkable resistance in battles such as Haldigati, 1576, where Maharana Pratap faced Akbar's army, or Chanwa, 1527, where Ranasanga confronted Babur. The Rajputs were not only warriors, but also great patrons of the arts, architecture, and religion. Among the most well-known Rajput leaders are Maharana Pratap, 1540 to 1597, and Ranasanga, 1480 to 1528.